It's TIE Fighter Renegades, a Star Wars podcast.
Woo, it is time for TIE Fighter Renegades, and baby, have we got something special for you. Well, it's not special means that it only happens every once in a while. This isn't something that's going to happen every once in a while. This is something that's going to happen every time. And when I say we, I of course mean me and Robin Freebeard. Robin, welcome back to TIE Fighter Renegades.
Woo!
Yeah. So here's what's quote unquote special and going forward. Rob and I have been talking past while. Of course, we talk a lot, brothers in life, that whole thing. And we were saying, you know, there's so much more. I mean, there's plenty of Star Wars news out there, right? I mean, you'd agree with that, Rob.
Oh, yeah. Almost too much.
Yeah, almost too much. I mean, we could, I mean, there's plenty of Star Wars podcasts that do go like weekly, or some, hell, they even go almost every day. And there's plenty of news to get into with that, certainly. But something Rob and I would like to do is to just broaden the scope a bit, get nerdy on all angles and not just talk Star Wars. Of course, you know, we mentioned in the last episode of TIE Fighter Renegades that we are certainly feeling a bit of franchise fatigue. And we're certainly still going to talk Star Wars. I mean, you got to understand, like with guys like Rob and I mean, talking about Star Wars, it just happens in life, like all the time. You know, you can't really avoid it, whether it's a podcast or not. So we are broadening the scope of the show, and it's not going to be just all the latest and, well, depending upon how you look at it, whether or not it's greatest, news and reviews in the world of Star Wars, but we're going to go all the way. We're going to talk all things nerdy, and hell, because this is TIE Fighter Renegades and we are renegades, we might just talk about anything at any given point and just let the conversation go where it needs to go. And we've certainly gotten the feedback from a lot of listeners like, wow, we wish you would have spent another hour on that, you know, but it was veering away from Star Wars. Well, now we are not going to be afraid. Not that we were ever afraid, but we are going to veer off when necessary. And, you know, when Rob and I were talking about this, we were saying, I mean, of course, the name of the show is TIE Fighter, a very Star Wars thing, but that's really in reference to, and you can go back to the first episode of TIE Fighter Renegades to realize this. That is something, that is in reference to the video game TIE Fighter, which of course I argue is the greatest video game ever made.
No argument here.
Yeah, there you go. So, and TIE Fighter, really, why it's so great isn't just because it's Star Wars. It is really a culmination of everything that Rob and I, you know, are into, you know, through varying, you know, genres, venues, types of media, etc. I mean, I really feel that way. Like it is the culmination of all the nerddom that I enjoy in life. It's that, you know, it's that good.
It's the high bar that we set for everything that we experience, sort of like in, you know, genre or geek culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So I think the name TIE Fighter in that reference, and Renegades, us being renegades, and again, we sure as hell are. I mean, in real life, as much as we are in anything fiction. Yeah, I think it fits. And so we're going to stick with the name. And again, we're still going to talk up Star Wars. In fact, we've got a great, or not great, but we have we have a Star Wars review to open up with that we'll get to. But yeah, so that's going to be the mode of operation going forward. We are also going to review, in this episode, we're going to review season 1 of Picard, and we'll see where else the conversation goes. So you're not getting any less content whatsoever. It's just going to be far more freeing and encapsulating much more in nerddom as far as content goes. I mean, Rob, you got any thoughts you want to share on this?
Yeah, I just think that, you know, a lot of times I can't speak for Brian personally, but I've often felt, you know, just limited by the scope of Star Wars alone. Sure. And there are many times that we've wanted to, or we do end up talking about other things, but then because we have, you know, our show notes set up in front of us, you know, with a series of topics that we're supposed to hit on for a Star Wars podcast, that we have to kind of abbreviate some of those conversations. And we think based on your feedback and just the way that we feel too, is that it is better to continue some of those conversations if, they are worthy of attention and expounding upon.
Yeah, 100%, Rob. And the other part too is that it's very hard. I mean, we talk about some things positive in Star Wars. I mean, like, yeah, Clone Wars is great and Mandalorian was awesome, but I mean, it feels like, and it's not like we've got plenty of bullshit to talk about in this episode, certainly, because we have some subjects we want to wrap up, that we have said we would talk about. But I think it'd be good, where we could, maybe this will give us a chance to be a little more positive at times too. I don't know. And I think people, especially right now, I think people might need that, Yeah. I'm not saying they're going to get it in this episode specifically, but overall, I think that might end up happening over time. And, frankly, the more shitty things get going forward, and I don't just mean like in the real world, I mean in fiction, I think the opportunity to go back, to look back, especially, there's so many things I know I've talked about over the years. And here's the thing, like me, I have as many shows as I want to where I can come out and talk about whatever the fuck I want to talk about. Admittedly, I want Rob to talk about a lot of stuff. In fact, I'd love, there's so many things I've talked about over the years. I'd love to hear Rob's take on a lot of these things. And as these subjects come up, and to kind of have a back and forth and really a good hangout around all things nerdy. And, when I go on Twitter, I think everybody's fucking insane, especially when it comes to nerdy things. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean you thought that was beautiful or good or deep or what? Like, I have no idea what the hell you're watching. And I know art can be subjective, but sometimes, you just got to look at it and go, no, this person, I don't know what the hell's going on for them. I think it'd be great to have a place where nerds of our ilk can all kind of come together, and hang out. And that I'd love it for TIE Fighter Renegades to be that. And, we will get into some real world stuff, I think, now and again. I don't think we can help that because, well, pop culture and a lot of this fiction is so pervasive now. You really can't help but talk about real life anyway, as far as it goes. And,
right.
maybe some of it's agenda based. And then you got to ask questions about that too. And so we need to have the free form or, the platform within which to do that. Anyway, anything else there, Rob?
Even going back to, the 80s and 90s, a lot of stuff that was in, science fiction and geek culture was allegorical to things that were going on at that time. And
right.
May still be relevant today. So this gives us the opportunity to talk about those things. It gives us to go back, the opportunity to go back and talk about some of the things that we loved that maybe you haven't heard of before.
Right.
And that you'll now have the chance to go back and maybe experience for yourself. We could offer some suggestions as to what was hit or miss in the Star Wars EU.
Yeah. And we're going to, this is going to develop organically, and we might come up with differing segments that people might find interesting. Already, just in this conversation that Rob and I are having, we didn't plan this really. I'm already thinking like, man, we should have at the end of each episode, maybe recommend a movie, from, and just start as far back as we can and just keep building up, each of us could have a movie recommation. I think people would love that.
Shows. Yeah.
Yeah. Or TV shows, something like that, to where, kind of a pick of the week where that way people have something to walk away with, something actionable.
That's a great suggestion, because I personally have, with the time I've had, unfortunately being off of work, been going back and picking up some older TV shows that possibly I didn't watch the entirety of or only caught snippets of here and there, back from the 80s and 90s or even earlier, that, I'm going back and look at some of this stuff and it's like, wow, this was some really good television.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, I'm going to call an audible. I already just added it. If you heard my mechanical keyboard, which is kind of loud, I already added in, pick of the week. And I think that's something that we'll do going forward. So, in fact, Rob, if you have something you want to recommend when we get to the end of the show, we could start it with this episode, for fuck's sake.
Right on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could certainly, toss out something at any given moment. In fact, I mean, hell, I'm just looking. Two things came in the mail today. I'm not going to make them my recommendations, but I got The Wizard from the Blu-ray of The Wizard with Fred Savage. Remember that one, Rob?
Wasn't that the one where they showed the very first footage of Mario Brothers 3?
Yes, that is the very same. The very same. That's pretty amazing. Anyway, and also, well, I'll let Rob see in the camera. No one else will. But there's the Atomic Wedgie collection of Revenge of the Nerds. All 4 movies in beautiful 480p. So anyway, okay, but that's not that. I won't make those my recommendation, but just to prove the point that we always have something I'm sure that we could recommend to people to check out. All right. Well, with that said, do we want to get into our first review for this episode, Rob?
That's why we're here.
Yeah. And again, we'll see where all this conversation goes. So Rob and I had this pre-ordered. I think that's safe to say. You had this pre-ordered, didn't you, Rob?
Yeah, for almost a year.
Yeah, same here. Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. So had this pre-ordered for almost a year because it was supposed to fucking come out almost a year ago.
Well, it was supposed to come out in December.
Yeah.
But they had it up for pre-order like last summer.
Right. Right, exactly. And, let's be clear here. What we're talking about is not some Kickstarter or some crowdfund campaign thing. This is something being published by none other than one of the largest media conglomerates in the world, that being Disney. So, it's not like they were out of money or anything and they couldn't afford to get it to the printing press. Quite the opposite. This is a book that I think will be very controversial for a very long time. Within Star Wars, and it is related to what I think will also be a very controversial movie for a very long time. That, of course, being the end of the supposed Skywalker saga, that being Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and it is the art book for Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. And let's see, who is it? So there was a foreword by Doug Chiang, who, of course, did the great work for the prequels as far as concept artwork. I think, despite how anybody felt about the prequels at the time, Doug Chiang's work, following up or trying to follow up to, and nobody can really match. Wow, that's terrible. Why is his name
Ralph McQuarrie?
Ralph McQuarrie, yeah. I mean, you can't match Ralph McQuarrie, right? One of the all-time greats as far as concept art goes. But Doug Chiang definitely did, I think, about as good as anybody could. I mean, you can easily put him up there. I mean, well, tell me, Rob, do you think Doug Chiang sits up there with the Sid Meads or the Johnny Eves and those types? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, the only reason I'm going to say no is because I think he has done a fantastic job at emulating the Sid Meads and the Ralph McQuarries. But so far as having a style of his own, I don't really feel that he does.
Yeah, I could see. Did you read Robotica, or are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, so that's like he did, because he was white hot after Episode 1. Even though, regardless of anyone's feelings about Episode 1, he did like this weird art book called Robotica that was kind of a story. And it's interesting to check out, but I agree. I understand your assessment. It's not as like where Sid Mead basically created the future.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a tall order. That's a big act to follow. Yeah. So me saying that, Doug Chiang isn't up to that level is not really like a huge criticism or big dig at him or me dissing him. I am hugely respectful of the work he's done. He is an amazing artist in his own right. Yeah. I just don't think he's at that level of actually changing the world of art and entertainment.
Yeah. No, all right. Yeah, I can appreciate that. But Doug Chiang, certainly one of the top guys that has come in the concept art space, within Hollywood and entertainment. So he did the foreword for this anyway. And the writing overall was done by, how do you pronounce that? Is that Shostak? Phil Shostak? Is that how you'd say that?
I was wondering that beforehand, and your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah. So Phil Shostak did all the writing for this, and in fact, we'll discuss some little bit of controversy with Phil Shostak as we get into talking about this book. But anyway, this art book, we've talked about it on many episodes of TIE Fighter Renegades, constantly saying, where the hell is this book? When is it going to come out? It was delayed at least 2 times, I want to say, because there were varying dates within March. I think it was supposed to come out, even though, like you said, Rob, originally supposed to come out in December.
Right. I mean, that's the delay that I it may have been delayed twice. I just remember that the initial delay and a lot of sort of like the rumblings behind the scenes about why that was.
Yeah. I think my understanding, I thought there was a point where it was going to actually come out on March 17th to coincide with the digital release. And then they pushed it back to the 31st.
Okay.
Anyway, my memory could be off on that, but regardless. Right. Now the book as is, looking at it, and we've had it for a couple days now, the book as is, I cannot see a single thing in it as to why they should have delayed the release of this book, because commonly the art books come out at the same day as the movie. That's happened with The Last Jedi. That's happened basically with Solo. It's happened with almost every Star Wars film that I can think of, where they come out on release day along with the visual dictionary, right? Which that didn't get delayed at all. But they held off on this one. And I look at this book and I go through every page and I'm just like, what, why? What was the point to delaying this? There's really nothing controversial in it whatsoever. But that said, this is probably one of the most leaked books in the history of art books anyway, or of cinematic art books. Because it did get released in Korea in January. Am I right about that, Rob?
Yeah, I think it got released along with the movie.
Oh, so it did come out on time there.
Yeah,
okay.
The book came out on time in Korea.
Right.
And books were actually, they were printed, they were published, they were sold.
Right. People got them in hand. Like everyday people were able to get them in hand. But then what happened? That like there was basically Disney went full Hitler and said burn these things in the middle of the streets. Like
pretty much. I mean, there was a recall. It wasn't just. I mean, the movie, the book was delayed here in the U.S. and I don't know whether or not any copies were actually ever printed and sold in the U.S.
Well, it was now to keep in mind, it was an 11th hour decision. Like, I mean, right. It was very, very close to release day that they said, "Oh no, we're delaying." Go ahead. Right.
And the copies that did go out in Korea, as I understand it, they weren't necessarily sold on store shelves because they were recalled pretty much immediately. People that got a hold of them were somehow that there were a few copies that got shipped out early, and then whatever people that are working at the distribution centers for these books possibly held on to some copies. So there are actually very few of the Korean copies of this book, original Korean version, still in circulation. And I've seen them go on eBay for a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, that's got to be a hot ticket.
It is.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, so in episode 34 of TIE Fighter Renegades, the last episode that we did, we talked about the leak of the script of Colin Trevorrow's script for episode 9, which was Duel of the Fates, right?
Right.
And in the article that I shared, the link is in the show notes for that episode. In that article, they showed, and we talked about them, the leaked artwork of Rey wearing a black suit similar to Luke's in Return of the Jedi, as well as having a blue double-bladed lightsaber. There was a lot of art that is not in this art book now that we've looked at it. Is that from the Korean version or is that stuff that somebody just somehow got their hands on?
From I understand it, those are not from the Korean version.
Okay.
We as yet don't have anybody who's put up a comparison of the two books.
Right.
Because the original, the Korean version, where they destroyed the copies, and there are a few of them in circulation. Uh, nobody's bothered to go page by page and compare and show what the difference was. All we have to go by is the publisher in Korea made a tweet, I think back in December or January, announcing that the book was being recalled due to content changes,
right,
or content errors or something along those lines, because of content reasons, I think was the exact wording that they used, and that changes would be made and it would be republished at a later point.
Yeah. Now, some of the leaked photos that we have seen for months now are in here. Like there's that shot of Kylo Ren, or that panel of Kylo Ren sitting on a throne with Rey in a very different black suit, standing next to him. Yeah, very sexy shot, in my opinion. When I talked about it, I had said the same. That's in here. But there's very few things in here that I think point at any kind of alternative. Now, I want to point.
Well, I would point out though is that I don't think that some of the concept art that got leaked, and you can kind of tell the difference, because the stuff for Duel of the Fates, it looks like it was all transferred pure digitally. Like nobody took pictures of the book or scanned anything. So I think that picture of, like the dark Rey standing next to Kylo on the throne, I think that is and always has been concept for the Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
So that was not part of Duel of the Fates.
Yeah. So I mean, this adds to some of the confusion around this. Now, on Twitter, as much as Twitter is not reality, and well, I guess this kind of proves the point, but basically just before the book was coming out, somebody made a tweet, and you responded to this, Rob, so you know the score better than I do, but I guess I kind of want to hear your story on it. Somebody made a tweet that he had whoever this Twitter person was had originals, and he said he'll know if there's this stuff isn't in this book, and that Disney was basically hiding shit. And then the writer for the book, Phil Shostak, comes out and says, no, the book didn't come out in December because it wasn't ready, not because we pulled it and we're trying to hide stuff, basically. And then you brought up the Korean stuff. I mean, tell me this story, Rob, of what happened on Twitter.
Yeah, well, somebody was just basically tweeting that, they were posting a screenshot of their Amazon account of showing that the book was being shipped, and they were all excited and everything. Yeah. And then another person came and responded saying, I've got all the saved pictures from the recalled version, and he was curious to see what they've added or taken away. And that's when the author, Phil Shostak, or however you want to pronounce that, responded, and I'll quote directly here, "Zip, the book was recalled because it was released too early," whatever that means. So I responded, well, then why were the Korean copies recalled and destroyed? The publisher claims it was because of content issues and would be republished with changes at a later date. Of course, he chose not to respond to that tweet, not surprisingly.
Yeah.
But it does create sort of like, a conflict between the narrative of two what you would consider official sources. You have the author of the book, and then you have the foreign publisher of the book.
Right.
Now, you might want to give the author more weight because, he's behind it. But then again, Disney also signs his checks. So take that for what you will.
Yeah. I mean, again, the it does feel like he just straight up lied.
Yeah.
This movie is such a mess. And yes, Disney has been doing damage control basically with every Star Wars movie since or after The Force Awakens, right? You had the reshoots for Rogue One. You had the change of directors for Solo. Last Jedi, was a shitstorm after the fact. Even though initially I think everybody was really excited about it, but then they got the product and like, wait, what the hell was that? But the going history for decades is that when the movie comes out, an art book gets released with it, warts and all. And George Lucas was never concerned about what was in the art books. And like the art book for Force Awakens had tons of alternative stuff in it, some
Yes.
of which I really wish we saw.
Right.
That would have been amazing, like the way
In fact-
Tokadana originally looked. And go ahead.
In fact, for me, the main point of buying the past two art books for both The Force Awakens and Return of the Jedi was getting some of the concept art that was actually originally developed for George Lucas's version
Right.
of the sequel trilogy, and it was based on his script treatments.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so finding alternatives is, I think, really has always been the joy of these art books. Even for the original trilogy, like seeing Vader's throne room or something, like from the Empire Strikes Back novelization,
Right.
not novelization, art book, if I remember correctly. So many things are so fascinating to look at. And I pointed this out in a Zombie One Underground Q&A recently. Like, there are so many things that Disney, since they took over Star Wars, have used that they patterned after Ralph McQuarrie's concept art to try and stick with that like Star Wars feel, I think. And there's times where it worked and times where it didn't. Like they're basically, I mean, not because this book feels like it has a real lack of how things could have been. And in fact, even the stuff that's in it that you didn't see in the movie, largely you got in the novelization. So
Right.
there is right down to the dreams, even like Kylo in the novelization for Rise of Skywalker, Kylo Ren even basically has fantasies about sitting on the throne with Rey next to him, which is probably one of the highlight panels of this entire book, if it had any. And so it's a shame. Like Disney's almost robbing from its own history, or robbing its own future, I should say, by not allowing everybody to see a lot of the alternatives of what could have been and kind of really mentally prepping people for when they might decide to use it.
Right.
So I thought that was bullshit. Go ahead.
And we have real world examples of that happening because in the Force Awakens art book, the early concepts for what would become Kylo Ren was initially called the Jedi Hunter.
Right.
And they had a number of different concepts for this character. And several of those concepts ended up becoming what they used for the Inquisitors in Star Wars Rebels.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think that's a lost opportunity overall with this. But, I mean, we want to review, I guess, the content specifically. But
well, that does seem to be the defining feature of this book is there's a lot more that this book is telling us by what's not in it than what is in it.
Yes, precisely. Yes. And that is the most important point to get into with the review. But overall, it is so weird that this book took so long, because when you finally look at, so long to get released and to get delayed and everything, there is nothing in this that, like, I don't feel like there's anything controversial in the book. What's, like you just said, very insightfully, what's controversial is what's not in it. That's what's really weird about it. And so it just comes off as odd that this book finally comes out now. And frankly, it just makes the movie worse. Because because it's not a confident book,
Right.
It's where every other art book comes out and it's gorgeous and it's like, oh, I can't. I mean, there's episodes of TIE Fighter Renegades where you said yourself, Rob, those were the books you're always the most excited about, was to get the art books. And this book is like the most uninspiring Star Wars book I think ever released.
Even the past art books, just going through them and seeing the development of certain concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Told a story, just an imagery of how the movie came to be and where it started and where it, progressed and what, how the end product ended up being what it was.
Right.
I'm not getting that from this book.
Yeah.
I'm not getting that story at all.
Right.
In fact, the only story I'm really getting is that, and I hate to say this, but they're running out of ideas. That's the story this book is telling me.
Wow, that is very interesting. I mean, I don't disagree with you. Yeah. No, I can hear that. I can hear that.
Because you look at a lot of the art, and it's very derivative
Mm-hmm.
of many of things that have come before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, you don't really see anything controversial in there. I don't even really see any designs that, like in past books, have sort of in some way or another expanded or broken the mold with what we know of as Star Wars. This book does none of that.
Yeah. In fact, speaking of Doug Chiang, who we talked about earlier, I remember when I first read. I remember I was in Barnes and Noble in 1999, and I was looking at the art book for episode 1, and the cover of it had the N1 Naboo starfighters on it, right? The yellow starfighters that everybody knows. And as out of place as I think those at the time looked in Star Wars, when you look at the concept art for them, like suddenly you understood. You're like, oh, Naboo is this really artisan culture, and these starfighters are works of art in themselves. And you only got that when you, in my opinion, you really only got that when you finally looked at the at the art book. And the art book gives you the chance to understand where these ideas came from, like you were just saying. And I think there's plenty of examples of that. And again, you get none of that in this. And in fact, I think it leads directly to what I think is the weirdest, the single weirdest thing about this book. And that is, there is not one fucking panel of Emperor Palpatine in this book. The central bad guy of the whole thing, of the whole movie, and supposedly the entire Skywalker saga, is not there. And that is weird. I am still trying to figure out what that says. I mean, what do you feel about that, Rob?
It is really weird. And I'll tell you, the first thought that comes into my mind is to wonder how late in the development of this movie did they decide to bring the Emperor back?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And that's supposed to be kind of the like we were just saying, the thrust of the art book is to show you the progression of the ideas. There is no progression of ideas for the film's central villain. Like, I can't. I mean, could you imagine? Fuck the Marvel movies, but could you imagine an Avengers art book without Thanos? Like what the hell?
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense.
I mean, it's fair to point out too, like you said, like the designs that they did use for Exegol, like I'm speaking specifically of the Emperor's throne, with all those spiky looking rocks and everything coming out of it.
Right.
That was directly ripped from Ralph McQuarrie designs from Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So I guess if you want Emperor designs, you're going to have to go back to Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely. And your initial thought was the same one that I had too, was that, yeah, wait a minute. When did they consider to bring him in? And was it so late that they literally didn't have concept artwork for what he was going to look like on that weird ass fucking thing that's dragging him around with all these vials going into him? That it's so strange. And I mean, is there even, I don't even think I saw a panel of the Sith throne. Go ahead.
I want to ask you one question about, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this when we reviewed The Rise of Skywalker, but did the appearance of the Emperor in The Rise of Skywalker seem a little off to you? I am speaking specifically is that, and I know he's supposed to be a clone or whatever, but his body does not look, it looks decrepit. It doesn't look decrepit the way it did in Return of the Jedi or in The Revenge of the Sith. He doesn't have the scars from, the Force lightning being reflected back on me. He had that very distinctive forehead pattern. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about. And you don't really see that at all in The Rise of Skywalker. He does look like, they do show his hands, and he's got missing fingers and bones sticking out here and there. And he does look like he's falling apart, but he doesn't look at all like he did in any of the previous movies. I
feel like when he gets revitalized from the dyad, that he looks like he does more or less in episode 3 at that point. But throughout the rest of the film, I agree with you. He looks, and in fact, he looks way too much like Ian McDiarmid.
Right. Yeah, that's that's basically what I'm getting at. Is they basically they put some makeup on him and gave him some some whited out cataract looking contacts.
Yep.
And said we're done.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, admittedly, I wouldn't be surprised if Ian McDiarmid was like, okay, I'll do it, but you're not going to put me in 20 hours of makeup. Like I'm not gonna go there. I mean, I could really believe that's what's happening there. But
that would also speak, like, if he was in a position to, if he could leverage that kind of position to have that kind of effect on the movie, that speaks more to a late developing inclusion in the movie, and that Disney was in a point not to dictate terms, because they were desperate to have his involvement.
Yeah. So when did Rebels end? Was that 2019? Was that early?
No, I thought it was like 2017 or 2018.
Okay. Because I mean, one of the first hints for me that Ian McDiarmid was coming back to play Palpatine in Star Wars was that they ended up using him to do voice work in the 4th season of Rebels instead of Sam Witwer, who does a great Palpatine. And so I feel like at that stage is when they were bringing him in. So as far as how late in the game he was brought in, I mean, that just adds to the weirdness of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Rebels ended in 2018.
Okay.
But, they also brought back James Earl Jones to do Darth Vader's voice in Rebels too.
That's true.
So, I mean, you like the voice work stuff is pretty easy these days. Is like they don't have to come into the studio, at Lucasfilm anymore. When these people are doing recording lines for an animated show or something like that, they can pretty much go to any recording studio in the country and do what we're doing now, is talk on Skype or some other form of communication to give direction and, get the work that they need.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So maybe that's not as big of a deal as I initially kind of saw or read it as. So but again, the lack of inclusion and it's also, it's not just a lack of inclusion of Palpatine in this art book, but like there's barely anything of Exegol in here. I mean, you get the Sith troopers. In fact, there's some great designs for the Sith troopers. You see those, but you get very little of Exegol overall. I don't know if I even saw the Sith throne in this art book. Again, it's speaking more to your point, Rob, of it's what's not in here that is really, really weird. And there seems to be I don't know if I ever saw the word dyad once in the whole book. Yeah. So like, how new? Go ahead.
And it'd be very easy to interpret, like, the Sith Wayfinder. I mean, that's a holocron. I don't care what you call it. It's a holocron.
And
they
that's
don't
what
call it
been,
that in the movie, but I mean, that's what it was in Trevorrow's script.
Yep.
This is the Sith holocron. So, I mean, I have no reason to believe that any of that, they just changed the name. They just called it something other than really what it really was.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, a lot of that stuff, major plot points for this film just aren't in this book. I mean, the movie already suffers from the fact, like we said last episode, it's basically a bunch of Vine videos strung together. And I guess you're getting concept art for some of the Vine videos in here, but there's like major things that you would want to allow the art book to elucidate. And it doesn't, it doesn't at all. I mean, and there was, so something I think I posted in the Telegram group, which if you go to tiefighter.xyz, you can find where to, link it. There's a link for that and you can go to it. I think I shared it there. that there wasn't a single panel of Rey with a double-bladed lightsaber. While it's not the blue double-bladed lightsaber that we saw in leaked artwork, there is one panel where she has the staff with a lightsaber on each end. But it's one out of the whole damn thing.
Right. And of course, we do see that in the movie, so it's not really that surprising that it's there.
Right. We see it in a more dark aspect. That was actually some of the nicer panels in this. There were a lot of different interpretations of a dark Rey that they had in this book. I liked those. I thought those were cool. None of them really looked like, sharp teeth dark Rey, but whatever. I was fine with that. So dark Rey being a thing was clearly an early idea to explore, or based upon how we're reading this book, how we're assuming what's in it, how it fits into the timeline of production. I mean, those are kind of the two main points. Is that a lot of that leaked artwork that we've seen, it's not here. We didn't, and like you said, it's probably digital scans. It may have never been even in the Korean version of the book, even the book we were supposed to get in December. And also the lack of the Emperor in it. I mean, what other do you have other negatives? And maybe we can get into some positives after that. I mean, what other negatives do you have potentially, Rob?
Well, I mean, just the overall quality of some of the art. I mean, I know that the turnaround on concept art has gotten increasingly shorter, just in the entertainment industry overall. I've seen certain conversations on Reddit from people who worked on The Mandalorian. You know how they showed the concept art at the end of each episode, and some of the artists responding said, we only spent a day or two on each of those pieces of concept art. And so it's not like back in the day where it's a full on actual physical painting like Ralph McQuarrie would do, where he would spend weeks if not months working on one large panel or something.
Right. So
I mean, and part of that is that the digital tools make the turnaround faster, but also it's artists spending less time developing the stuff, and I think it does show. And so that, I mean, you might want to call that a negative about the book, but I kind of see it just as a negative of sort of art department production in the entertainment industry these days.
Right. Well, I mean, this is one thing we know for sure about the production of Rise of Skywalker is that was a very rushed production, to the point that they were editing on set as they were filming. That's crazy. I mean, they basically very little time spent in the editing room. I mean, and this is something happening in the entertainment industry overall as well. In fact, when we talk about Picard, this is something that I learned. The season finale for Picard, episode 10, was last week as of this recording. Okay, that's when it released to the world. Up until a week before that, they were still working on the visual effects for that episode. So 2 weeks ago, they were still working on visual effects for an incredibly expensive show that everybody's supposed to be going nuts over, for one of the biggest franchises in fucking history. I mean, Hollywood's that's, I don't even know what to call that. That's not on steroids. I don't know what that is. These turnaround times are insane. And the pressure of the deadline, there are people who work well under a deadline, no doubt, but I don't care who works well or not under that kind of pressure. Pressure always kills creativity. It really does. And I can say that any artist, any producer, I think has an understanding of that matter.
Especially creative content. When you're working under the gun, you're not getting the person's best.
Yeah, I mean, you can get moments of brilliance under the gun, but it's not. You're always going to. I mean, well, look at Star Wars itself. George Lucas said in '97, no, there's other things I wish I could have done. And he went ahead and did them finally. He thought about them for years and he changed them. Whether people like it or not, the artist always wishes he could have done more and could have been more creative with something at the time. So pressure never really helps as far as that goes. But anyway, so yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up, Rob, on the book overall. Yeah, I mean, as far as good stuff, I don't know. I mean, I did like the Dark Ray stuff in the book. I thought some of the Sith Trooper, I mean, you said this first, Rob, but I thought some of the Sith Trooper concept art was pretty cool. Getting a better look at some of the Sith Eternal was cool. So there's a lot of dark side stuff in it. I mean, a lot of the great stuff. And I think you said this earlier, Rob, I can't remember if it was off air or on air, but you had basically said that like the best stuff already came out, was already leaked. That was in this.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically like, if you have a takeaway review for me, if you're still undecided about buying this book, you haven't bought it yet, I would say you could probably give this one a pass and just go online, whether it be Twitter or Reddit. You can find basically all the best stuff from this book very easily.
Yeah. No, I agree with that assessment completely. Were there any standout pieces outside of those by chance that you thought were really solid, Rob, or was the best stuff we've seen?
Yeah, like I really do feel like all the best stuff that's in this book I had already seen before the physical copy was in my hands.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, other than the Dark Ray stuff, that was the only things that I hadn't really seen leaked that I thought were good, or some of the Sith Trooper. But again, we already talked about those. This book, I think, just highlights an incredibly rushed and troubled production. It is no surprise that the movie turned out the way it did, because this is a mess right down to the art book. And that's unbelievable. Like that's so hard to grasp, especially for a Star Wars movie. I mean, all that's running through my mind is I just want to say shame on you, Disney. Like that this is, I mean, something so beloved, and for you to like rush and shit on it is so weird.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, when you put it in context with things like that, Kathleen Kennedy said that, well, maybe it's just too hard to do a trilogy. Well, I guess if you're going about it in this way, and you're, like if I'm following the story that this art book is telling correctly, then, she's probably right. Yeah.
I mean that, and what's funny, like Hollywood just can't, I don't know what the fuck they think. Because for a while there, we were dealing where when you would say they were making movies based off of a book series, right? When they'd get to the last book, they'd always split it into like 4 movies or 2 or 3 or 4 movies, whatever. And sometimes, in fact, like with was it Divergent? I think it was, or Divergence. They made the first half of the 3rd book, and then I don't think they ever even made the second half, because the first half of the book never did well. So like, I don't get it. There's times where they're willing to split a story into 2 movies, and then they don't have the sack to. I don't know. I don't get what's going through their heads. Like either they want to rush it, or they don't want to take the time. Like their priorities just seem way off. Yeah, I don't even know how to describe it.
I mean, the end cap that this book puts on the sequel trilogy is that they never had a plan from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's very clear, and that's their problem.
Yeah.
Is that they can't commit to something and follow through on it.
Right. To be fair, and I've on Sovereign Tech and other shows, I've been very critical of George Lucas. He also did not have a 9-movie plan. They can claim that.
Well,
but
I think he had a plan, but it's constantly changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that. Like, I mean, he constantly changed the story of how many movies there were.
Right.
Like, in 1978 or 1979, when Splinter of the Mind's Eye came out, he very clearly said in the forward for that I have a 9 movie, I have 9 movies in my head. Then fast forward, 10, 15 years, and he's talking to Leonard Maltin, and he says, no, there was only ever 6 movies. So, whoa, wait a minute, George. You can't say that. Like, we know you said there was 9, and we also know, I mean, based on like stuff Gary Kurtz has said and so on, I mean, that these stories have changed dramatically over time, and that's okay to have like trap doors where if something happens, you can change things on the fly if you need to. But to your point, even if George Lucas didn't have a 9-movie plan, he knows how to make a plan, and he knows how to have a creative vision. And that's what Disney does not have.
Right.
Overall, minus say maybe The Mandalorian and anything Filoni's involved with. So your point I think still stands, and this art book just makes it worse. It's so fucking frustrating. Anyway,
it really is. I mean,
go ahead.
I'll tell it to you straight, folks. That it's just I'm pretty much done with the sequel trilogy. I don't know that I'm ever going to watch it again.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm ever really going to go through these books again. It's been on my mind to sell the 3 books as a set online and see what I can get for them.
Right.
I'm pretty much over it, unfortunately. It hurts me to say that, but the legacy that these films leave is not one that I necessarily want to continue with.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, because there is, I mean, the media is insane anyway, but when you get critical, you are raising, Rob, and you always do, very logical, critical arguments against what's going on in Star Wars overall, and especially with the sequel trilogy, right? And when you do that, what you get from, say, people involved in Hollywood, or even, we'll say, the Star Wars sweaties, the big fans who have like their own podcast or whatever, whenever you're critical of this stuff, they come out and say, yeah, but these movies are made for kids, or these movies are meant to be, it's space wizards with laser swords, and, you're taking them way too seriously. They can't have it both ways. They can't have where they are doing entire stories talking about this deep philosophy that was supposedly in even just The Rise of Skywalker, like these deep philosophical concepts that we don't get displayed on the screen, which if they did, maybe we'd feel different about the films, but they're not there. Like, oh, well, this is actually Rey's journey and it means this and blah. No kid is going to get that, like you can't, it's, they're constantly shutting down dissenting opinion about these movies and about, what they're doing with Star Wars overall right now. And they just move the goalpost. They're like, well, they're movies for kids. Oh no, they're actually very deep and you just didn't understand it. And it's like, well, if you're using those arguments as defenses, you can't have it both ways. Something can be for kids, can be for multiple demographics. I have no problem with that. And I think that's wonderful when it is. But you can't defend something based on the demographic argument and say you're appealing to all those demographics. Like that, that's not possible. Do you have any thoughts on this, Rob?
Well, it's funny enough that their argument is that you're taking this too seriously, because my argument to what you're saying here is that you're taking their arguments too seriously.
Sure. Because
it is very much born, well, let's just say that they have some skin in the game.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So, it's very clear that at this point that Disney works with what we'll call, Star Wars influencers.
Yep.
And they've demonstrated that if one of these people steps out of line, even for a minute, the candy gets taken away, and sometimes that influencer has, say, a little temper tantrum, say, like, I don't know, Christian Harloff.
Right.
So when these people are making these arguments, it's from a sense of desperation on their part that they have to basically construct some on-the-fly narrative that supports their argument and doesn't come from any place that's logical or well thought. That's something they would actually have to take time and do some actual research on, but that's not what Disney's asking for.
Yeah. And you're totally right. And this actually speaks to kind of why, when you and I were talking and we're like, maybe we should open up TIE Fighter Renegades more, beyond Star Wars. Like, I listen to other Star Wars podcasts, and I'm even infuriated, not just with Star Wars in general. I'm infuriated with these other podcasts. What you were just describing is clearly going on. And they're basically, I mean, the way that they're able to do, I mean, like I said, there is enough news certainly to talk about every week with Star Wars. I do think that's true. Okay. But they're doing, 2 hours plus every single week. And what they're doing is they're basically like, they're making shit up of, well, when I saw this scene with Rey, that's what it meant to me and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, hold on, are you watching, or go ahead?
And sometimes these people aren't even expressing their own feelings or opinions. They're taking hot takes from Twitter.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
that's true.
I will see, like, something will come up and there'll be like a comment to, responding to a piece of Star Wars news, and it'll be the one that has the most likes, and it's really witty, and it's a great hot take. And suddenly that gets taken and somebody puts it into a podcast and speaks it out of their mouth as if it was their own words.
Yeah. No, that happens too.
Or it gets used as a clickbait headline. That happens a lot as well.
Absolutely. But I mean, but this goes back to this childhood thing. And this is another point I really want to bring up is, like, they will say, they'll talk about this really deep thing that when Rey blasts lightning out of her fingers, that, it means this. And it's this really, like, tragic and blah, 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 and all this feeling that's come together and everything. But then in the same breath, they'll say they love Star Wars because, it like reminds, because of the nostalgia trip, because it reminds them of their childhood, and they're a child again when they go and see the movie. And they'll defend these very movies because it says it makes them feel like a kid again. But, like, again, when you're in the action of defense, you can't have it both ways. It cannot be this deep and fucking, like, wildly philosophical Carl Jungian diatribe, but then make you feel like a kid. Like that blows my mind that they try to, engage in that. And it's like doublespeak, and it just doesn't. I have other points on this, but I'm really, I think mainly, I think what's coming up for me is I'm really tired of everybody telling me that I'm into this shit because it was something that I watched as a kid, or that it's because it's something to do with my childhood, or blah, blah, blah. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Childhood is a beautiful thing. I'm not saying anything, to the contrary. Okay. But I'm really sick of, like, of that, of that being put on me as to why I'm into these things and what I should expect out of these things. I mean, like the title of the show it's TIE Fighter. That game did not appeal to the child in me. That game appealed to very much an adult in me. That is that is not a 2-button platformer on the NES. That game has like 20 fucking keys you have to use. All right. You're not going to be a 6-year-old and rock that game. And I'm not insulting the intelligence of 6-year-olds. They're brilliant, but you get my point. Like, no. TIE Fighter appealed very much to the growing man in me, okay, or whatever the demo or whatever you're growing into, or it appealed to the desire, the adult desire to want to be into space and the reality of flying in space and so on. Had nothing to do with the childhood. With my childhood or anything like that. Video games don't have anything to do with childhood. And I think finally the narrative is coming around to that this isn't shit for kids anymore. Necessarily. I mean, there's games that are for kids, but then there's plenty of games, clearly they are not. It just, this childhood argument pisses me off to no end. I mean, you got any thoughts on that, Rob?
Nothing other than like I said, I don't take these people very seriously. And if they take themselves seriously and they honestly believe these arguments, then I think there might be a little bit of projection going on.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm just, and we didn't, I mean, I'm just so sick of it. And because, we didn't get to review this, and I don't know if we ever will, because like you said, Rob, I mean, I'm as sick of the sequel trilogy, I think, as you are. And I gave it a lot of chances. But, I watched like all the making specials and everything. And the amount of times that they referenced, oh, it gives us back this sense of childlike wonder and all this crap. And it's like, man, come on. Like, no, let's go forward. Let's build up. Let's go higher. Let's go to the next level. Let's, I'm just, and don't tell me Rian Johnson went to the next level. That's horseshit too. Like that somehow he was coming out with some really brilliant shit. If it was that brilliant, like there's that 10-minute diatribe on the home release, the home video release of Last Jedi, where he explains to you his theory behind Rey's lineage or lack thereof. And it's actually a beautiful thing. Like I really appreciated what he had to say, but that was not in that movie. Like, I mean, it was not there. The journey of Luke was what he described was not parlayed at all. Honestly, I think that's why they made him do the 10-minute little clip so that he could explain it, because nobody got that out of the movie that that you watched. And I'm going all over the place, but yeah, the sequel trilogy done. I mean, we'll talk Clone Wars, we'll talk Mandalorian and all that, but I can't imagine the sequel trilogy is going to come up much in any future episodes. Anything you want to add on to that, Rob?
No, probably not. I like I said, I think we're pretty much over it.
Yeah,
it's time to move on.
Yeah, man. Anyway, yeah, I'm tired of people like reading in all this crazy shit into these movies. It's so insane. Okay, so that said, how about we do move on? How about we move on? Let's talk about something like that was so great that it absolutely healed the wounds of just about every franchise out there. This healed all my problems with Star Wars. It healed all my problems with Star Trek Discovery. I mean, this healed every fucking wound in Hollywood. I'm so glad that this came out. We were graced with 10 amazing hours of Star Trek Picard. It was fucking awesome. It was so great, Rob, I'm about to go into tears here because it was so bad.
And that's what we'd be saying if we were living in a parallel universe. Oh, yeah.
Rob and I are both just sitting here with our head in our hands because it's just, what the hell was that? What was that?
I don't even know. I don't know what Star Trek is anymore. I really don't. It's, like Brian has this term that he used for the 2000s Battlestar Galactica, and he calls it new BSG. And I take that and I run with it. Like this is new Trek. Yeah. I don't find any, really significant parallels between, what came before in either the next gen era or the original series era.
It's horrible. It's just horrible. And you actually, speaking of things that have been said, you had said, I forget what this was even in reference to. It's either Star Wars or Star Trek. But you had like responded to a tweet or something, and you just said like you're just putting down your tea, and you're like, well, yep, fan fiction gets messy.
Yeah. I think
this
we were
whole
talking
time
about Star Wars. I mean, like, yeah, this is that's.
Oh yeah, we were talking about the sequel trilogy. Yes.
We were. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fan fiction gets messy, and that's like everything from Discovery up, folks. It is fan fiction, and I can't picture. There's no way Lower Decks is going to save this shit. There's not a project on the line. And who knows what even is going on with Section 31? Fuck. I mean, I already think Hollywood's going to basically erase any of their plans and just say, well, COVID-19, sorry, but this,
yeah, Hollywood's doing the same thing the comic book industry's been doing for years now.
Right. This is their way of doing like number ones again. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which, by the way, how did everybody enjoy not getting any comic books yesterday, huh? Wednesday. What the fuck? Anyway, all right. So COVID-19 serious. I'm not saying otherwise, folks, but yeah. So, all right. Star Trek Picard season 1. So we got 10 episodes here. This was showran, maybe I should say, not necessarily by Alex Kurtzman, even though I feel like there's a lot of Alex Kurtzman shit in it. I
was going to say DNA, but that's a good word too.
Yeah, no, whatever, it's excrement either way. And yeah. But it's run by Michael Chabon, who is supposedly some kind of great writer. If he is, I did not see it on display here. And in fact, he is no longer the showrunner. He is now executive producer, probably because he's like, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, because I've actually seen interviews with him about Picard, and he has kind of gotten out in front of fans and their critiques, kind of. And he does seem to understand what made Star Trek great. Like he does understand the concept of episodic television instead of this serialized television, which inherently is not a bad thing, but you have to have a fucking plan and you have to know how to do it right. Like say Babylon 5 or Blake 7 or something like that. Clearly people today don't know how to do this, but he seems to have an understanding of it. And so I'm going to give Chabon the pass that he had some kind of marching orders. And he basically got out from underneath this as quickly as he could so that he wasn't on the hook for the shit show that this became. But that might be me being a little too generous.
I'm not going to be that generous. I don't give anybody on this a pass. And I've also read interviews with him, and I don't necessarily agree with his take on, why the Star Trek universe has changed in the way it is.
Yeah.
It's would you agree it's a very cynical show?
Oh, it's terribly cynical. It's downright depressing. It shows, right. Across the board, from absentee parents to murderous psychopaths to all kinds of things. It shows the absolute worst of humanity in it. And that's not just in the new characters that they've introduced, but also in returning characters. I'm not particularly in love with their interpretation of 7 of 9. Oh, the idea of her becoming the Borg Queen, even for 5 minutes, like hell. Yeah. 7 of 9 at the end of Star Trek Voyager would have said, fuck you. She would have given 2 fingers and hopped in the Delta Flyer and gotten the fuck out of there. That's insane. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
But yeah, I have a hard time believing that anybody could get on board with this and go to the lengths that they did with basically, I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. Ruining Star Trek.
Yeah.
And still have their conscience intact at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like if Michael Chabon had any integrity and if he actually did understand Star Trek, then he would have walked away from the production either a third of the way in, halfway in. At some point, he would have not stuck through to the very end.
Yeah, absolutely. And before anybody else decides to banty out that whole thing, well, you're just saying this because it's not the Star Trek that you grew up with. Fuck you, because the characters Star Trek used to put on display were largely shining examples of what human adults could be. It's not about childhood. Like Star Trek has always been, a show that kids could get into because of, whatever was going on. But it was always, it's a multi-demographic show, and it was a show that at the very least was about growing, the whole idea of Gene Roddenberry's whole idea was about humanity maturing, not kids, right. Not just childhood, you're not just your childhood. Go ahead.
It was a very aspirational show.
Yes.
And that it caused people to view a future that was different than what they could see in the short term of the coming years in their lives.
Right.
It's kind of like Brian often says, is that, he's a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. You know where all that comes from? And my guess is for Brian and both and I is from Star Trek.
Absolutely.
That's where that attitude comes from. And it's not on display here in Picard or Discovery at all.
Yeah. Yeah. This is this is not what my childhood self wants. I mean, sure, it does too, but this is what everybody wants. Go ahead.
And I do not buy into this bullshit argument that somehow Star Trek needs to be a reflection of the times that we're living in and dealing with those realities. Because let me tell you that the 1960s were also a very socially tumultuous time with a lot of problems.
Right.
And yet they still managed to make a show like their original series.
Yeah. That idea is outrageous because I mean so when the original or when the Next Generation came out, this was 1987. You had an incredibly strong economy. I mean, everybody looks at, the 80s, what's it commonly called? The era of greed, right? Or the decade of greed. You had Star Trek coming out in the season finale, the episode The Neutral Zone, saying basically, where Picard gives that huge speech about, we've grown out of our infancy. We're done with money, at a time when, money's everywhere. Like, I mean, if Star Trek was playing to the times, like they would have been living it up. But no, Gene Roddenberry's vision was we show what humanity can be past all this nonsense, and again, as we've been saying over and over again, Picard really just showed humanity as they are now. And what a shame.
Yeah.
Because right now, especially right now, is when we need to see what humanity can be, not what it is.
And that was my problem with this series from the get-go. Before we even got the first episode, we got that short trek, Children of Mars. And that was literally my interpretation from the beginning is that these two girls, tearing at each other and treating each other shit, this just shows me that humanity hasn't grown up at all. That, these kids are not being taught how to resolve conflicts in any positive or meaningful way. And I'm sorry, but the Star Trek that that we grew up with showed a future where, people were given the tools and did have, the sort of economic, mobility to move beyond this kind of, pecking at each other shit that we do.
Yeah. I mean, again, the idea that Star Trek needs to like grow or get with the times is again, it's anathema to what Star Trek is. No, Star Trek has always been wildly ahead of the times. Like it doesn't need to get with the times at all. The times need to get with Star Trek. That's always been the direction things were supposed to go. That's what's always excited people about the show. Or about this franchise. It's insane to say that it needs to somehow, because I mean, look, this was Game of Thrones in space, right down to the brother and sister, the incestuous kissing and implied fucking. I mean, there are so many elements to it that I even think that the composer, Jeff Russo, who's good at what he does, but is hired to like add in even that low violin that everybody remembers from the theme song for Game of Thrones. I mean, like there's so many aspects to this that is Game of Thrones. And Michael Chabon even said that, the market speaks as far as, what gets made on television. And I guess basically everybody in Hollywood or everybody in the entertainment industry just thinks everybody loves Game of Thrones, which I'll tell you this is not true. And I've been saying that for fucking years. Okay. But everybody loves Game of Thrones, so we just got to make everything Game of Thrones. And that's why it's serialized and it's not episodic. I mean, in Discovery, I think was victim to this as well. It's a mess. So I don't know if you want to add anything onto that, Rob. Otherwise, we can kind of maybe like break down some of the specifics here.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, well, let me ask you this, Rob. How did you feel first couple episodes? Like just starting it off.
I was still skeptical, but I would give it a shot. I wasn't going to be down. I was keeping my mind open. I wasn't, taking my feelings about Discovery and transferring them over to Picard. And I would, I actually was hopeful, and I know we don't use that word here, but I was hopeful in the beginning because prior to this, I had always felt that Patrick Stewart was somebody who, with some integrity, and that he had some creative input on this show. And so that, his what we were told, deep involvement with this show told me that we might actually get a quality product.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my feeling. The first episodes is like, well, it's not quite living up to like, the highs of the Next Gen or even the original series or Deep Space Nine. But then again, the first season of all of those shows were pretty rough.
Yep, that's true. That's very true. Yeah. I think first couple episodes, I was cautiously optimistic. I'm like, okay, this Zot Fosh sounds kind of cool. Like there's little things. I was like, all right, yeah, we'll run with this. Let's see what happens here. I thought the Romulan characters that were on Picard's vineyard were actually pretty cool. I was digging what was being put down at first. I was like, oh, this is very interesting. Can you say what episode you felt like it started to fall off the rails for you? It wasn't anything that I could put a finger on where it started falling off the rails. It was sort of just like a gradual progression. I do feel that actually in the first episode, the decision to kill Daj was very strange to me. Mm-hmm. Here again, I was giving it the benefit of the doubt, but right off the bat, and here again, I already gave my feelings about the Children of Mars and how I thought that was shit right from the beginning. Yeah.
But yeah, like looking back, there were signs from the beginning that there were going to be problems with this show. So it was just sort of like a gradual realization that these things that, I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt about, I probably shouldn't have been, and that, the problems that I was seeing were very much real things.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say for me, go ahead.
I will say the moment where I would kind of like, because I was watching, I chose not to, at the beginning, not to binge watch this show, and I was watching each episode as it came out the day that it aired. I stopped doing that. I think was at 5 or 6 episodes in when they decided to kill Hugh. And at that point I was just like, no, fuck this. I'm out. I'll wait till it's all done, and I'll watch all, the last 3 or 4 episodes in one shot just to get it over with and, rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is a problem I think with Discovery as well. These shows might be somewhat more enjoyable if they were released in a binge format like Netflix often does.
Right, but that's not conducive to them, stringing people online and keeping them, tied, keep their subscriptions.
Exactly, paying for the streaming. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that's a fail in itself, because, I mean, really, like, even if it's dumb, kind of, like a Fast and Furious movie, if you don't take the time to think about what's happening, you're just along for the ride. But if you break this up into multiple episodes, you can't just go along for the ride. Like you have time to think about them, and you end up thinking, wait, that doesn't make any sense, and so I think that they're shooting themselves in the foot by doing that. And Patrick Stewart originally said the show was going to be binge worthy. Well, it's like, okay, then let us binge it. Don't give us this weekly release. But I would say to answer that question, I want to get back to the Hugh thing. I think it was around episode 5, and it was more a matter of timing than anything else. But when it got to episode 5, and we basically had no answers to the setups for the mysteries that were set up in the first couple episodes. By episode 5, 0 answers. I was like, oh no, they don't have enough time to like close out this story. And I don't think we even knew we were going to get season 2 at that point. I'm not sure if we knew that. And that had me very worried. That's when I was like, this isn't going to make sense. And then I think even in that episode, there was the scene where Narek and Soji were dancing and sliding around on a Borg fucking cube. And I saw that happen. And I'm like, wait a minute. You are making a mockery of who I think is simply the greatest villain ever created in fiction, because the Borg are so not human, as in, I mean, I know they're biological partly, but they are anti-individualist, right? They are so mechanical. They don't think for themselves. I mean, like they are a contrast to everything that makes us human, in my opinion. That's why they're very much, I think they're the ultimate villain, right? They're the ultimate bad guy. And they're terrifying. You know, even you watch First Contact now, they're fucking terrifying.
Yeah. Well, they're the ultimate collectivist too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Well said. So for two characters to just be dancing without a care in the world on a Borg fucking cube, it just struck me so wrong. I'm like, that's not, like, if I was in a Borg cube, I'd be scared to touch the wall because I think it was going to assimilate me. You know, I mean, that's nuts, you know? And so that part really, really bothered me. I mean, the character of Narek overall bothered me through the whole show because he's actually basically like the dark. Go ahead.
The best episode was the one that he wasn't in it at all.
Yeah. Which was the one with Riker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. That was actually the best episode of the whole season when we had Riker, even though I think they did a disservice to him by basically making him a pizza chef the whole fucking episode. But okay, you know, yeah. So that's when it really fell apart for me. Now you brought up Hugh. I thought the way they treated his character and what brief moments we got with him were absolutely brilliant.
They were.
One. Go ahead.
Yeah, just the best interpretation of it, like right from the start, even, you know, well, not, I wouldn't say from the start, but like when Captain Picard and Hugh meet on the Borg cube for the first time again, I mean, it was just really nice at that point to have somebody meet Picard and not have them go, oh fuck, not this guy.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Yeah. That was great. And I mean, even the whole speech that they had where Picard was saying, like, you know, you're with the XBs, with the ex-Borg, you know, like you're making them not victims anymore. And, you know, like the way that you're respecting them and bringing them back, like that was really touching and really beautiful. I thought that was well done. And then what do they do the next episode? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was when we were talking about, you know, Star Trek being aspirational. That was pretty much the only aspirational moment in this entire series.
Yeah, and it was the only time I really felt like Picard was Picard, you know, and that I love that. But then what do they do? Well, you know, I mean, there's something happy going on. There's something good in the show. So CBS is like, well, we got to kill it. And spoiler alerts, Hugh dies the next episode, pretty much. I mean, well, he got introduced briefly a couple episodes previous with the character of Soji, but yeah, he ends up dying like basically right after, and it's like, oh, well, that sucked. You know, like that was bullshit.
And not only that is, you know, he dies in the arms of a character that we don't even really know that well, and doesn't have that much development to him.
No, and it's frankly annoying. Yeah, I agree. That was very, very, very pointless. Or felt like a pointless death. Speaking of pointless deaths, let's hit on this. The death of Icheb in that opened up the episode. A lot of people came out on this one, and I think rightfully said, okay, you know, we don't mind if there's gore. We don't mind if there's, like, you know, really like gruesome shit. But what was that? Where they ripped out his eye and everything. And a lot of people really gave them like, no, that you don't need to do that in Star Trek. Like, that's not necessary. That's not necessary anywhere. It was and like, if the idea is you make the show something modern to bring in new viewers, they're going to have no goddamn clue who Icheb is. And I guarantee you they're not going to go look into who Icheb is. They don't care. That was just weird. What did you think about that?
Well, I mean, in a way, I do get it, but it's so misplaced, because another things about the Borg that makes them so terrifying is kind of the body horror aspect of all of these, you know, mechanical implements being, you know, being surgically, grafted onto you against your will. And then you kind of have like the reverse of that, the mirror of that, where like the things are being ripped away from him against his consent.
Yes.
And so like in that sense, I get what they were trying to go for, but at the same time, it didn't really lend itself to anything. It didn't add to any sort of character development. It didn't add anything to the Borg. It didn't add any, like they were trying to show you where Seven of Nine was mentally at that period of time. And here again, it's not a good place. It's not a place anybody wants to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It didn't work. I mean, I guess I want to bring up the other main criticism that this show got from just about everybody other than, I guess, the diehards, or I don't even want to call them diehards, because it's very tough for me to see where a Star Trek fan could really enjoy this. Like there's nothing really Star Trek here. But anyway, the swearing. This was a very controversial aspect, I think, overall with the fandom, about the amount of times that they said fuck and everything else. I mean, I don't mind swearing. I do it all the time, and I imagine if I was alive 400 years from now, I plan to be, but I would swear then too. But Star Trek has made it abundantly clear, especially in Star Trek 4, that especially there's a certain hierarchy within swearing, right? Like damn and hell were kind of okay. And you actually, that this hierarchy is a real thing, because like the FCC guidelines on what you can say as far as swearing have dramatically lessened over time, but there's words they'd let in, and then there's words that they still wouldn't let in. Like, what was the big deal when South Park said bitch? That was like the first time you were able to say that on TV, and that was in the late 90s. So point being, in Star Trek 4, they made it clear between Kirk and Spock, which was in the 23rd century, and in the 24th century, when all this is taking place, humanity is supposed to evolve even more. In the 23rd century, they weren't good at swearing, right? And this is true for Discovery as well, that like in Discovery, there was a lot of swearing too. And it's like, wait, why are they swearing? Like Kirk and Spock make it clear that they're not good at it. Like swearing, like Kirk tries to, he tells Spock he's not good at it, but then when Kirk does it, he's shitty at it too. And so that does seem incredibly out of place for them to do that. Was this a big deal to you at all, Rob, the swearing, or was that just kind of an afterthought?
I wouldn't, it was a deal. I wouldn't say it was a big deal. I mean, we also had other moments in Star Trek, like, and here again, it hasn't always kind of like landed very well. You had the oh shit moment that Data did in Star Trek Generations when the Enterprise D was crashing. That's about as far as I really want to see Star Trek pushing it with the swearing. Yeah. But there were some people even back then who were kind of arguing that really wasn't, very Star Trek. And they were just doing that for the movie audience, the general going movie audience. And I don't disagree with that interpretation. I think they're doing that same thing here. They're trying to play to their concept of the modern audience. And since they're trying to emulate Game of Thrones, and they're swearing left and right and all these. I mean, this is something that actually HBO has been doing for a very long time. Is that they're always trying to push the envelope with swearing in their shows, and that's been going on for decades.
Yes,
and decades.
This is right.
So it's not just It's not just a Game of Thrones thing, but here again, where Star Trek is trying to emulate this is another, sort of side effect of that, or another thing that they're trying to copy.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't have as big a problem with it. And I probably wouldn't have any problem with it if it wasn't basically set in canon that no, people in the future suck at swearing. So a lot of people don't realize this, but Picard actually said shit on The Next Generation. He just said it in French. Like there's a point where he says mer, and nobody knows, nobody real, like to this day, I think a lot of people don't realize that. And that's fine. I don't, certainly don't have that expectation on anybody, but even that's done in a like a classy way, right? Because it's in French, for fuck's sake. So yeah, it does feel strange. It's not that big of a deal to me, but again, it is certainly something that stands against what we know of as canon. And it's clearly trying, I think, to bring in the non-Star Trek audience. And I think that's really at the heart of a lot of the problems that we have with both Discovery or with New Trek, like you say, and New Trek with Discovery and Picard. So outside of that, the character 7 of 9, I mean, I think we already kind of expressed how they really dropped the ball on that. And
more than once.
Yeah, more than once. And in fact, in the, again, spoiler alerts, folks, in the finale, there is this very quick scene where you're seeing the whole crew aboard the whatever the fuck the ship's called, Rios' ship there, where she is holding hands with Rafi, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, in a very
These
intimate
characters
way.
are so forgettable. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's abundantly clear I think that there's, some lesbianism going on. Now, I'm 100% behind that. And this isn't the first time Star Trek has ever laid that out, right? We could go back to Deep Space Nine for that kind of stuff. And certainly Star Trek has dealt with gender issues, but they've always made it a centerpiece of when they know they're being rebellious and when they think something needs to be addressed. And it was always to, I think, very much highlight the personal freedom and personal expression of, woman or, I mean, regardless of character. This felt like a very after the fact kind of, hey, we're representing bisexual people, and
it was a throwaway moment.
Yes, exactly. Well said. I mean, what do you think about that one, Rob?
It pissed me right the hell off.
All right.
Yeah, because it's not only is it a throwaway moment, but understand, folks, that you can go back and listen to past episodes. I've called bullshit on before when people bring up the argument of what would you call it, virtue signaling. 90% of the time when people bring that up, it's bullshit. But that's exactly what they're doing here. Is they're looking to score some points with the queer crowd,
right?
And it's not in a good way. It's a throwaway moment. They had many points throughout this, several times in this series where the character of 7 of 9 and Raffi stood face to face and had interactions and conversations, and yet they chose not to develop that relationship at any point.
Yes. Right. And I think
it's a very conscious choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll give you a theory here in a second, but also there was when we first basically, or more or less first got a full episode of 7 of 9 in Picard. She has an encounter with someone, with the villain of the episode, which is that gal who's holding Bruce Maddox hostage or whatever. And you do get hints that they must have had a relationship, but it's never explicit. And to prove that it's not explicit, and again, explicit is being proud. Okay. That's when you're like, you're out there and you're really representing. When you're doing this kind of like quasi or hidden shit, no, sorry. People had to ask Michael Chabon, hey, did they have a relationship? And sure, he said that after the fact, right? But like you had to ask them to verify because you don't know, as to where if they were really representing, there would be no question that, that 7 of 9 is a bisexual character. Okay.
Right.
Now, what I think is happening here, because this is the same thing that happened with Rise of Skywalker, right? Like at the end of Rise of Skywalker, when the rebels or the resistance is all celebrating and everything, at the very, very end of the movie, you have where the 2 female resistance members kiss, right? So that's there. And it's like, and in fact, when we did our review, I was even like, oh, well, that's nice. But to your point, that's a throwaway moment. And in fact, it literally got thrown away.
Yeah,
because
they cut it out for the
countries,
Chinese.
Precisely.
Yeah,
in
they
other,
cut it
in
out
other
of the
markets,
Chinese market. Yeah.
Precisely. In other markets, they cut it out. Bullshit, you're representing anybody. Bullshit, you're standing proud for anybody, or for any kind of, gender expression or any kind of expression of sexuality. When you cut the movie out, when it goes to China, you can kiss my fucking ass. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is another throwaway moment that when it gets to other markets, oh, gee, that scene with Seven of Nine and Rafi holding hands isn't there anymore.
Yep.
And that just makes it worse. They would have been better off not showing it, than doing the cut. And I think that's what's going to happen. What do you got?
Well, they would have been better off if, like I said, they had actually developed that relationship or the beginning of a relationship when they had the ample opportunity to do so. Right. Now, I'll give Discovery shit all day long, but when you're doing representation, they actually do it right with Stamets and Culber. That's the way you do it.
Well, to a degree, you're right. You're right. I appreciate, and you could argue, to me, like, marriage doesn't mean shit to me, I don't care about that concept. Okay. I think it's an ancient institution, that might not have a place in the modern world, but for a lot of people, it's a big deal. Obviously, the absolute, the activism, in the United States alone for gay marriage, which, hey, rock and roll. But what's funny is that, so there's a Discovery book that came out in December. Okay. That was, it was, anyway, I forget the title, but it's the one that came out in December, and it has, Stamets on the cover of it. Dead Endless was the name of it. That's it. In that, they make it abundantly clear that Hugh and Stamets were married. They never mentioned that in the show. They never, ever mentioned that in Discovery, and they should have. And I think that was another placating to certain crowds, and yeah, because go ahead.
Here again, you can't walk away from that show and not interpret that those two are in a relationship. It's very,
no, you're right,
out there in front. And that's all I mean is, we could debate on the execution of it and how they actually did it, but in terms of actually, we said, it being out there and being explicit, that's the way to properly do it.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is certainly unavoidable, and it's given time to develop. Right. So yeah, no, yeah, I hear that. But I'm just saying, I think they also didn't go all the way. On Twitter, we can kind of go there. In books, we can go there. But on the show, well, someday that might be in some market where that's not okay. And, oh, man, anyway. So, but one, I think, relationship that they really spent a lot of time with and didn't come out of nowhere and was, very heavily developed in it was the relationship between Rafi and her estranged son. Oh, wait, no. Did anybody even remember that happened? That was in one episode, completely out of fucking nowhere. Unless you read the book Last Best Hope, where you even knew she had kids, I don't even know what the fuck that little storyline was. It's not even a line.
I'll tell you what I think it was. I think that, when we're introduced into this character, I think it was in the second episode. Mm-hmm. The impression the character gives from the beginning is not a great one. Basically, you get somebody who seems like they're feeling very sorry for themselves, right, and is, falling back on, some sort of chemical dependency to get through life. And right. I think the storyline with the son was an attempt to give her more reasons to basically be an alcoholic. Other than just being kicked out of Starfleet.
Right. Yeah. No, I can hear that. But again, it speaks to a larger problem that the show has. It does not spend enough time with any of its elements. It just
Yeah,
does.
well, I mean, that's
it,
what I'm saying. I'm
yeah,
not saying that's a good reason for them to do it. I'm
right.
just saying is that is like the initial impression the character gives you for the state that you see them in. It doesn't play very well,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
they try to basically fix that later on by adding another little tiny little bit of character development that's done and over with and never mentioned again
Yeah. Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
rest of the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, it absolutely is poorly executed in every way.
Yeah. 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 Everything in the show is poorly executed. I mean, that's just its MO. So, well, let's bring up some other points about it.
So, Brad, I want to ask you a question. Would you agree that in past Star Trek shows that it has always had characters that had, defining character traits that you could always look at and, they were very positive character traits, things that you could easily identify with and want to emulate in your own life and, basically lead you to, acting like a better human being?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, right down to Troy. I'd love to be more empathetic. I mean, go down the list. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, exactly, right. But do you get any of that with any of the characters here in this show?
No, they're all horrible. I mean, they're just. I just feel like they're all horrible. I don't even want to emulate 7 of 9, and I love 7 of 9 in Voyager.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, what do you got?
I mean, we already brought up Hugh, and he's, I feel like, the lone exception
Yes.
in this series thus far. But yeah, very, very much so. I can't think of any, like all of the defining character traits of the main cast of the show are some sort of, I don't want to say weakness, but some sort of character fault or some sort of failing or some sort of deficiency. I mean, you have, you have Picard, the main character of the show, who has some sort of, brain abnormality and is, feeling very kind of, disenfranchised, not only with Starfleet and, the society is in, but doesn't feel compelled to do anything really about it until, like, he's actually confronted with the fact that he's basically stepped aside and done nothing these last 30 years.
Right.
And then we already talked about Rafi and basically her drug abuse problem. We have the captain of the show, Rios, who is, has post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yep.
And still is dealing with, serious traumas. We have Daj, who I don't even know where to start. I mean, this character doesn't even know herself, and she seems to change from episode to episode as to who she thinks she is.
Right.
And then you have the Dr. Girardi, who straight up becomes a murderer, from one little mind melt.
Which, by the way,
I didn't know mind melds had that kind of power to turn people into murderers.
Yeah, I also didn't know, like, Romulan I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, by the way, we never really see what the fuck that whole thing is. Like, what is being shown to the Zhat Vash? What is being shown to people in that mind meld? We really never even get to see that, which I think is a complete fail. And that's totally an Alex Kurtzman thing too, where he's like, ooh, the mystery, like this whole show, there's no scientific explanation for shit. It's all, ooh, mysterious, ooh, cult, ooh, mysterious.
And it's not even original because, and many people have pointed out this, but they just pretty much stole it whole cloth from Mass Effect.
Yes. Yeah. Just like Last Jedi stole from New BSG, which, I mean, fuck that show, but still that's what happened. Yeah, no, right. I agree with that. Yeah. No, there is absolutely, there's not a single, in my opinion, likable character in the whole thing. I mean, I think Troy kind of dropped the ball. I think Riker was basically made fun of. And oh man, I mean, there's so many tributaries I want to go on with this, but yeah, you have a great point. Like, and Picard, well, shit. I mean, we don't even have Picard anymore. You know, like Picard's supposed to be the great character. That's not Picard. That's Grandpa in a tin can. And like that is not that. Go ahead.
Do you think it's more Patrick Stewart than Captain Picard?
Yeah, maybe. But I always thought, this is what makes it worse is this show, like Patrick Stewart was one of the few people that I was not disillusioned with in Hollywood, where I was like, no, he's the guy. He's just, a lot of Picard is him. I mean, you got to separate the art from the artist. I understand that, and I know that with William Shatner and even a lot of people that I have respect for. But I can't even say that anymore because I don't know what the fuck happened. I mean, and I mean, like in a way, Patrick Stewart, and I don't want him to, but in a way, I don't want anybody to, but in a way, Patrick Stewart died with Picard in that show for me. And that's unbelievable for me to think about. Because I mean, Patrick Stewart has been very much an activist and has said beautiful things in real life in very recent years, about domestic violence, about all kinds of things, very personal stories that he'd shared that I thought were absolutely beautiful. I mean, I used to constantly say that there are like three guys on this whole planet that I would, if they said, "Hey, Brian, bend over. I want to give it to you right up the ass." I'd be like, sure, absolutely. And Patrick Stewart was one of those guys. I mean, and not only that, and he's meant a lot to a lot of people. I mean, I've had people tell me, they'd say, "Brian, there are three people who, if they ask me to do anything, I do it. One of them is Patrick Stewart, or, one is Captain Picard, the other is Optimus Prime, and the other is you." And that's how much this guy, I mean, that's not to promote me. I'm just saying that's how much this character and this person meant to people. And like, that's gone, it's just gone. Anyway, sorry. I think I'm getting off track. Go. So
No. I mean, you pretty much said everything that I was feeling. So, I mean, like, and in one sense, I'm glad I'm not alone. In the other sense, it is a very sad thing.
This doesn't, why even I'm baffled by this whole idea of, like, they put him into an android body, right? And they even call it a golem. I don't even want to go there because the amount of occult shit in this show is I haven't seen shit this blatant in a long time. I'm not going to talk about it here. That's a whole separate subject. But why put him in an android body if the android body is somehow, amazingly, it's weak. It's miraculously just like a human being. It's not an advanced thing at all. I don't grasp that at all.
It's very hard to watch that and not interpret that there's some sort of transhumanist agenda going on here.
Oh.
and go me with, like, I don't even have as negative opinion about transhumanism that Brian does, but even I can see it in this.
Yeah. I think it's unavoidable. I mean, what's being put on display here. And that speaks to a major problem with the show as well, it was really, go ahead.
It was really funny because I wasn't even trying to do this, but in the Telegram group, we were talking about the series and this very issue about transhumanism and about, and I jokingly made the comment, upload your mind to big data and be saved.
Yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, they literally took that and ran with it in the last episode, quite literally.
Yeah, the treatment of androids overall in this, and that's a great point. I mean, because, like, again, the treatment in the show overall is very anti what the Next Generation had laid out in 2 points. One is that Data did not see being an android as being superior. In fact, there's points where he specifically says that. Like, he recognizes that there are metrics that make him superior, but he does not feel that way at all. And in fact, he wants to be human. Right. He wants to become more and more human. That's the goal, is to feel, to have, like, access to all these things. I mean, even Star Trek: The Motion Picture could almost be argued to be transhumanist in a way. And there's, like, an end line that would certainly point at that. But Kirk makes it abundantly clear that, artificial intelligence has things, like when it's purely logical, that it can't grasp, like other dimensions and all these other wild ideas that only humans can really grasp. And even Spock lays it out. But anyway, so this show is promoting Data as actually being the superior life form, when Data, for 7 years or longer with the movies, was making it clear he was not, that humans were actually like the real deal. And also actually was it the first season episode Hide and Q, where there's the great moment where Q and Picard are arguing in the ready room. Q's dressed up like a marshal. And he's, like he starts reading Shakespeare. Right. And he starts reading from Hamlet, and Picard interrupts him and says, "Oh, no, I know Hamlet." And he starts going down the whole list, and it ends off with humanity being, oh, how like a god. And Q throws the book at him and says, like, surely go ahead.
Before he starts quoting Shakespeare, he says, what Shakespeare said with irony, I say with conviction.
Right, exactly. So Q throws the book at him, and Picard says, and he says, it's like, surely you don't see yourselves that way. And Picard says, no, I see us becoming that one day. He's talking about humans, not androids, humans becoming like a god. And I think that's something that's strung throughout Gene Roddenberry's work, and this show shit on that whole thing. Now, that's just point one, is that Data was trying to become, again, was really overall trying to become more human, and transhumanism was not the agenda on the show, in my opinion. Now, the second point here is Measure of a Man, probably the most famous episode next to Best of Both Worlds of Star Trek The Next Generation, where Data is on trial for whether or not he is a life form. Basically, I think this whole show is an expose on that argument was lost. Yeah. Because if Picard agreed to, and you find out in the book, Last Best Hope, it was Picard and Geordi's plan to create the the A6s or whatever the hell they are, the Zoom type androids that are building all the ships to save the Romulans. They created a slave race, when that's exactly what Picard was arguing against, was creating a slave race of androids. But that's what they fucking did. Right. And
that's probably my biggest problem with this entire show, is that it is point blank telling us that all of the most important ethical debates and issues that Trek has always dealt with are over. The debates are over. They're done with, and the verdict is that humanity has lost. And they tell you this point blank early on when Dr. Girardi comes to visit Captain Picard at his chateau, and she picks up an Isaac Asimov book, and Picard says to her, this is, I'm not one for science fiction. I guess I just don't get it.
Yeah.
That says it all right there.
Right. And, actually, you made a great point to me. We were chatting one day, a little while back, and you said, you know what, if Q showed up right now in Star Trek Picard, he'd wipe out the human race. He'd say, you failed.
The trial's over. Humanity.
Trial's over.
You've been found guilty of being a, dangerous, savage child race.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly what humanity looks like in Picard.
And that was the whole, oh man.
Yes, that was the point. That was the point.
That's how the show ended. The Next Generation is how the show began, and it's how the show ended. And it was Q saying that the trial was never over. But by the end of the Next Generation, humanity had won. But then what happens? Oh, fuck. Well, no, in 30 years, forget about all that. Forget about all the good that humanity did. Go ahead.
I don't have anything against the Star Trek Next Generation movies.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, the book ending of Star Trek Next Generation, the series, is probably the most perfect book ending, beginning to end, of any series in the history of television ever.
Yeah. I
like if they had never made any more Star Trek The Next Generation after All Good Things, I would have been like, it would be perfect.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't argue that. And there's even like Red Letter Media who've been doing some hilarious reviews of Picard and bringing up great points. Clearly people who understand Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry himself very well. I mean, they basically, like the one guy basically said, he kind of said the same thing. He's like, yeah, I don't even like to think that the movies happened, and I get that, like, because it does end, like you just said, Rob, it does end perfectly, with all good things. I think that's an amazing end to a show. The only thing I could compare it to would be Babylon 5, and I mean, it's amazing what a perfect cohesive whole that is. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny too, because as happy as I am, and I know you are too, Rob, that we got Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and that there was Voyager. I mean, I remember when LeVar Burton infamously said there shouldn't have been no other Star Trek after The Next Generation. Now I'm kind of thinking he's right. That's where I used to be mad at him in hindsight. And LeVar Burton would go on to, I mean, he would direct a lot of episodes of Enterprise. He'd be very supportive of Star Trek overall. But now I think he needs to stand by that statement a little more, because
I don't entirely agree with it, just because I do think that, Deep Space Nine did do some things better than Next Generation.
Yeah.
But there's an argument to be made there. I will admit that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love Deep Space Nine too. We don't need to get sidetracked on this. This would be a great conversation for a future episode, because, I mean, admittedly, and by Ira Stephen Bear's own words, he knew Deep Space Nine was intentionally against much of Roddenberry's vision. Like, that was his idea. He didn't like, that everything was so goddamn utopian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that I think the thing that he leaves out when he says that is that it expounds on the reality of humanity and puts it into context of the Star Trek universe. I mean, you have, like, people in Deep Space Nine actually admit to, having and enjoying sex.
Right.
That's a thing that really didn't, exist beforehand.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah. No, I hear that. I hear that. And I mean, that's some of Deep Space Nine's greatest moments, like when Worf and Dax go into sick bay or whatever.
Just that the holosuites exist at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's some great shit in that. Well, anyway, yeah, I hear it. So, I mean, and that's fine. Like, Deep Space Nine is a darker side of Trek, but it still did it right, and humans were still ultimately top of their game in the end. Yeah,
it was a darker side of Star Trek, but it kind of, unlike Discovery and Picard, it showed you the path through the darkness.
Yeah, it did that. I mean, but also I think there was the comfort too, because you have in later seasons of DS9 where Cisco gets really fucking dark. Yeah. I mean, all we have to do is say, I'm okay with it,
he basically, lies to the Romulans and Starfleet to get them into the war. And in the last season, he pretty much has a mental breakdown. I mean, some pretty dark stuff. And you had the whole episode where they went back in time to the I forget the name of the character, the Bell Riots.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Here again, these all very dark things, but they always, in the end, they showed the through the characters, you saw a way through the darkness, and a way that they retained their essential humanity and everything that, like we talked about, those aspirational character, traits were not only retained, but some ways enhanced by the ordeals that they went through.
Yeah. I do wonder, though, if there was, and this is maybe part of what's wrong with Discovery and Picard. I think there was, like when I was watching Deep Space Nine, I mean, I liked it fine. I mean, I really liked it. But I think I felt a comfort when it would go into those dark places. Yeah, but I know Captain Picard's out there and he wouldn't do that, or I would think to myself, yeah, but Janeway's out there, and she explicitly would, say over and over again while they are in the Delta Quadrant, no, we don't break Starfleet's principles just because Starfleet's not around, And so I wonder if there was a comfort in, okay, we can go those places because we know overall there's plenty of really great people out there that maybe wouldn't necessarily have done that sort of thing. And I think that kind of speaks to a big problem with Discovery and Picard, is that it's just all dark.
Yeah.
And we have no one else to look to other than maybe Pike, but fuck. Anyway, go ahead.
So like with Deep Space Nine, I would like to bring up like a couple of like really good examples of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
That happened, at the end of the series. After they conclude the Dominion War, and Captain Sisko and General Martok, and I forget the Starfleet Admiral, they all beam down to the ruins of Cardassia. And, General Martok wants to break out the blood wine and celebrate. And, Captain Sisko, quite, rightly, looks at the destruction and the death around him and pours out the wine on the ground and recognizes, this, no matter how you stack it up, this is a tragedy, and this was a failure on everybody's part to find a peaceful resolution to the problems that we've had.
Yeah. The
other great example we have is with, the character of Damar, who, comes back to Cardassia and tries to lead a revolution. And he does become this revolutionary character, but he is able to do that through the character of Kira, who has, been on the receiving end, literally, of Damar's oppression. Yeah. And she quite rightly, at one point Damar says, there's an incident where the people start rising up against the Dominion on Cardassia, and the Dominion just literally wipes out entire cities.
Yeah.
Full of people. And Damar says, who would be that brutal? Who could be that cruel? And Kira says to him, who could do that, Damar? Who has that kind of casual brutality in them? And he has an awakening at that moment,
right? Because that's what the Cardassians did to Bajorans,
right? Yeah. And he isn't able to become that hero that he is at the end of the series without having that moment.
Yeah, well, so that's absolutely, and it's a powerful one. I remember it well, and I mean, his little speech is great. It speaks to your point that there were character traits you wanted to emulate, and we have none of that in these shows, or we have none of it in Picard. There's nothing you really that I think you want to emulate. Yeah, man. Yeah. I hate it because I want to complain about everything in it. It all just, except for Hugh, it all just feels wrong. It doesn't, and it's not that it's just different. Go ahead.
The one thing the good thing that they do in that show with Hugh, and then they just throw it all away by killing Hugh and then killing all the XBs.
More or less, yeah.
And they just casually murder all of those people just for what? To show what a badass this Romulan woman is?
And what a terrible character she was. A shitty villain overall. I mean, Narek's bad because he's basically the abusive boyfriend trope, which is terrible to put on display, even in Star Trek. And we don't even know what happened to him at the end of the show.
Sorry. Yeah, we're supposed to feel sorry for him at the end. Bullshit. No.
Yeah, but his sister, that character, what was that? I mean, just bad. She's given all of the visual cues to be bad, but we know nothing of the character. We have no reason why we should even care. It's just go ahead.
She's a zealot. I mean,
yeah, right.
That's all I really get from this enemy of the Zhat Vash is I really didn't think they were that interesting at all. They were just a pack of zealots.
Yeah. There are so many little problems that we could talk about with this, that I'm still baffled by. How do you let Commodore O, who turns out to be the head of the Zhat Vash, which is also part of the Tal Shiar, who was in Starfleet for who the fuck knows how long, how do you just let her go? Like, if you got the fleet of, and they're all the same goddamn ship, if you got a fleet of the most advanced ship Starfleet's ever built, which I guess they had no problem making that fleet. I don't know what that's about. How do you not say, and Commodore O, you're under arrest for fucking high treason? Like,
yeah.
They're like, oh no, you can just go, you turn around and you leave and everything will be fine. Like, what? I don't know. And this whole premise. All right. I do want to talk about this. The whole premise of the show, which is based off of, Romulus being destroyed, which we knew of in the 2009 Star Trek movie, which I don't mind them giving recognition to that. I think that's fine. I'm not going to shit on the dying work of Leonard Nimoy by any stretch. But Romulans suddenly, like, what happened to the Romulan Star Empire? Keyword empire. I'm fairly certain I've looked at a few chronologies from Star Trek, and that consists of thousands of worlds that also aren't near any one sun or, any particular sun that it would wipe out the entire empire if one of those suns happened to blow up. Where are all those birds of prey? Where are all the warbirds? Where are all the scout vessels, the science vessels? Where is the fleet that was always holding Starfleet at bay, right? And you can't say it's like, well, they all got destroyed in when they went after the Dominion in Deep Space Nine. No, that was a Tel Shiar fleet, that was not a Romulan Star Empire fleet, which is kind of the main military. The whole premise just seemed wildly off, that somehow the Romulan Star Empire needed Starfleet for anything.
That's a really good point you bring up, because I mean, what we got in Deep Space Nine was that the Dominion effectively completely obliterated the Tal Shiar. So how do they still exist in Picard?
I guess they could build back up over time, but anyway, keep going.
Yeah, but I mean, the only explanation that I could come up with, and here again, I just have to invent it whole cloth out of my imagination, is that it all fell apart, and this is because that the Romulan Star Empire was so heavily centralized that once you cut off the head, it destroyed the entire organization, and you probably had a lot of infighting and civil wars that were happening, between the time of the end of, Deep Space Nine and the beginning of Picard.
Yeah.
And I admit that's a stretch, but that's the only logical explanation I can come up with.
Yeah. I mean, I liked that the show was actually exploring Romulan culture more. Like, I thought that was actually a winning recipe, and it's one of the things that kept me fairly optimistic in the first couple episodes. I think they were too over the head with it being almost an anti-privacy argument, like saying, no, privacy is bad because you'll end up like the Romulans where they don't even know their own names, and all. And I thought that was way over the top, but that part just didn't make any sense. The whole premise made no sense to me whatsoever. I understand why the Nero, the villain in the 2009 Star Trek film, why he wanted to destroy Earth because his wife died when Romulus was destroyed. Okay, that makes sense to me. Like, I get that. You're on a personal mission of vengeance, but for the whole empire to fall apart, just something about that seemed wildly off to me. Like, I mean, I don't know. It didn't make sense. But anyway, that's, I guess, neither here nor there. And the whole, like you mentioned earlier and others have said, they basically ripped off the plot line for Mass Effect Andromeda, as far as like this, terrible thing coming. And they could have even done great with that. Like, it would have been awesome if they brought up the Takan Empire when they're talking about this ancient empire that got destroyed by artificial life. That would have been phenomenal. Like, oh, cool. Yeah. Let's talk about the Takan Empire more, but they never bothered with that.
And instead they basically used, it seemed to me like like when these AIs, from these ancient AIs show up through that portal at the very end, they looked like the same assets they were using in Star Trek Discovery for control.
Oh, for control. Yeah. For the AI control.
The tentacle arms with, the three pincers or whatever, they look the same thing.
Yeah. So,
I mean, basically Cyber Cthulhu.
Yeah, exactly. Come, Cthulhu, please. It's over. It's all right. Picard, for some reason, died. I don't know. Go ahead.
Devour me first.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess, we could go on forever because there's so much to nitpick that was so terrible. But I guess let's wrap it up with, how did you feel about basically the second death of Data? I mean, what were your thoughts on this, Rob?
It was very hollow.
Yeah.
That's about all I can muster for it, because it's just, I don't even like to think about it, because that character was very important to me in Next Gen. And I felt like they had already dealt with his death, and then they bring him back just to kill him again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't like it at all.
Yeah. I mean, and the sad part is I've seen multiple treatments of the character of Data, one of which was at one point supposed to be kind of considered canon, which was the Countdown comic for the 2009 book, in which he's back. He basically did take over B4's body. But I mean, I've seen plenty of great ideas of how Data could come back and storylines that he could be a part of. And yeah, I just feel like they just shat on the character. Like, I mean, it was just doubling down on failure.
And he seemed even less human at the end of Picard than he did at the end of Star Trek Nemesis, or throughout the Star Trek feature films, from the point where he gets the emotion chip installed in Generation. He starts becoming more and more human-like in his mannerisms and his humor and all that kind of stuff. And apparently he lost that again, and he's back to being Data like he was mid-run of Next Generation. Yeah.
Or, I mean, even the Data we saw, which was a possible future in All Good Things, where he's at Cambridge, and the only reason he goes for putting the white tuft in his hair is because he felt it made him look a little more distinguished. He didn't want to be old; he just wanted to look a little more distinguished. Yeah,
it was an affectation, which is a very human thing to do.
Yeah, it was nice. It's like, oh, he's a little vain. Okay, that emotion chip's doing all right for him. He is becoming more human. But it was okay. As to where now it felt like they were trying to do a cheap copy of Dave Bowman in 2001, where he's just like laying in bed and old in some kind of weird simulation of a room. And that just makes things worse, because I do think that movie is also very pro AI in a weird way. It's not pro AI, but it's highlighting a potential pro AI. That's a long story. Bottom line being, it's a cheap copy, and maybe that's what can be said about the show. I was very disappointed with the second death of the character, because we never really got the character back, and his legacy seems incredibly flawed with what the other Sung character, whatever the fuck he was doing on this planet. It just none of this helped anything. If Nemesis, I don't even think Nemesis was that bad, but if that was bad and you were trying to clean that up and like give a better ending for these characters, you failed horribly on every count. Yeah. And I don't know, that's really, I guess, how I feel about the show. And I mean, what else do you have on this, Rob? Anything you wanted to bring up? Anything you want to add in?
I mean, I guess the only thing I have left is to ask, where do you think they can go from here?
They don't know. Like Michael Chabon has even said it. I read an interview with him yesterday, and he's like, I don't know where we're going to go. It'll be interesting places. And it's like, don't do serialized television if you don't have any fucking clue where you're going. Yeah. But regardless of that,
do you think there's any way they could fix this? Or is it just,
No,
I don't think so either.
I mean, for one, just on, I mean, Star Trek always has little ethical dilemmas with its technologies that nobody wants to think too hard about. Like there's the classic transporter problem, right? Is the person who beams down to the planet the same person?
Right. The whole ship of Theseus argument.
Exactly. Bingo. Yeah. Right. And there's other ones, you know?
Right. And you still have, the same problem with Picard at the end of the series too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's not Picard. Like the ability to upload memories. Sorry. I mean, and in fact, even in unless from the years 2374 to 2399, there was a quantum leap in the understanding of human consciousness. That should be impossible, more or less, because it's stated multiple times by Picard himself in The Next Generation that humanity does not understand consciousness. Like when he's asked about what, go ahead.
And you would think that a species that did have that kind of grasp of consciousness wouldn't be in the state that it is in Picard.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'd know the human condition so well down to the subatomic level. Sorry, you did not just upload Captain Picard's consciousness into that robot. That did not happen. Like I don't know what you put there, but that's not Captain Picard. I just can't. I can't go there. So anyway. Yeah, I don't know where they're going to go in the second season. I can't picture them really fixing it because now this was their one chance. They could not screw this up. And I would argue, and let me know, Rob, what you think on this. Even if they did basically a mediocre rehash of The Next Generation, format and everything, back on the bridge of the Enterprise, the whole stuff, even if it was mediocre, right? That would have been better than what we got.
Yeah.
This should not have been
because
hard.
At least it wouldn't have been, the overly cynical depression fest.
Right.
That, everybody seems to want to revel in these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Michael Chabon came out and said, and I don't disagree with him. He said, there's no way we could make anything that could live up to The Next Generation. Like that's basically what he came out and said. And I'm like, well, yeah. I don't disagree with you, but you didn't even try.
Right.
You literally didn't even try to make something that lived up to that. And that's pathetic and insulting. And to again, one of, as I've said many times, one of the greatest fictional characters of all time. In fact, a series of some of the greatest fictional characters of all time, but certainly Picard is just so well regarded. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, do you have any thoughts anywhere where you think it's going to go second season?
I really don't know. Like you said, I've already seen people online, suggest, because we know Guinan's coming back.
Yes,
he went on The View and invited her back. And so, there's been some suggestion that, they're going to continue the story with the Borg and they're going to have Guinan and they'll bring back Q. And of course, as soon as somebody brought up Q, I said the same thing that I said to you before. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, if you have Q show up, then it should just be over for, the entire Star Trek universe and humanity because, verdict over, guilty, done. Everybody's, erased from existence.
Yeah, in fact, on the Star Trek YouTube channel, the official YouTube channel, they just did a thing with John Delancey. I think that's pointing at that he is going to come back. But you raise a great point. So I want to recant what I just said. You could actually make the series better in season 2. You give a final episode, Q starts the trial again, and he offs the entire species. There, boom, awesome, nice.
I don't know that I would want to watch that, but yeah.
It's like, okay, you fixed it because you were at least honest of what the conclusion is of your interpretation of Star Trek, CBS. Way to go. No, I saw online. I did see some people say it's like, the best part of the series is when that last black screen came up at the end of episode 10. I was like,
It's bad when you have no choice but for the cure to be as bad as the disease.
Yeah.
That is the only option left available to you.
Yeah. God damn it. Yeah. All right. So we do need to wrap this up because this episode's going to go like 3 hours. We only had 2 subjects. Yeah. And it's another verdict. And I brought this up, I think, in an episode. So there's a comic book that Marvel did for Star Trek: The Motion Picture in 1979. There was an essay at the end of that comic book. And the very last words of that essay were basically this: Star Trek, we hope that the motion picture is a success because Star Trek needs to live on forever because it is representative of our salvation. And I read that. That's how seriously people took this shit in 1979. Like, and that's what Star Trek is supposed to be about. And at the time, Gene Roddenberry still had a lot of control. And if he didn't want that to be printed in that comic book, it wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And it brings me almost to the point of tears that Star Trek is no longer that, because for a long time it was representative again of what we could be. And now it has turned into pew, 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 explosion, transfer to robot body. Ooh, wow, incest, etc. And it's just, it has nothing to do with my childhood. The exact opposite. It is what I wanted to see 100 years from now, not 20 years, 30 years ago. And that's a shame. That's putting it mildly. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, we considering what we've seen of Discovery season 3, they're definitely leading us down that path to where the Federation is pretty much nearly dead and gone, and the entire galaxy is a shit show.
Yeah. And
so, I mean, at least they're being consistent.
Yeah, well, that's true.
That's the only thing I can say.
Yeah, no, that's true. But then, and you're right. But then it's like, okay, so who's going to save the Federation? Michael Burnham with what? Her slack jaw, wide-eyed look? Like, what the hell? Maybe if Kirk went into the 31st century, everything would be okay. But anyway, you're right. Yeah, at least they're being consistent. At least they're on the Depression Fest. And again, that's boy, because Star Trek could be so powerful right now for helping people out. And I mean, but at least we do have a good 40 years of some great shit that people can watch for all time. And I know they're infinitely rewatchable because I watch them over again. Ellen and we watch Star Trek almost every night. But it ain't this shit, and you have great stuff to really get into. And I'm glad that exists at least. So any other closing words, Rob?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well.
All right. Well, I do want to leave people on a high note. We got to give them something good. Do you have a pick of the week? Is there something that really touched you recently, Rob?
Yeah, I've been going through with my ample amounts of spare time now, and kind of like downloading some old science fiction TV series that I didn't really I didn't either catch in their entirety or just miss completely. And there's one that I picked up that is called the Starlost.
Oh, man.
Yes. Yeah, I knew you were going to recognize this one because it was co-developed by Harlan Ellison.
Yep.
And even though that he ended up becoming disenfranchised with the show when it went into production, and used a pen name, told them to use a pen name for his credit in the show. I watched the pilot recently, and I thought like the concept of the show was like actually really strong. And granted, it's kind of cheesy in the way that 70s science fiction was at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just the general concept of the show and what they were putting forward, I thought was just phenomenal. And it definitely shows, Harlan's brilliance in it.
Yes.
And so I'm going to continue watching more episodes. I've only, like I said, I just watched the pilot the other day, and I invite other people to give it a chance. It is available on the public library. It might take you a little while to get a hold of it, but there are people offering it up out there, including me. So take a shot.
Yeah, I will say also, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I recently picked this up on, it's not on Blu-ray, it's only on DVD, but you can get it, just about any source will have it for about $20. And it's a great set. I mean, not a long series by any stretch, but boy, that's a damn good recommendation. Yeah, I wholeheartedly recommend that show as well. I would go with that. So yeah, wow, I didn't even see that coming, man. Nice pick. Shit. I don't know. I would have, I mean, I love the show, but I would have never like even thought to mention it. We are going to review this show in the near future because I didn't even know I'd get to. So this is why I love Rob. You know, it's like for years that we've known each other. It's like anything I'm talking about, he just like he just picks it up. He knows exactly what I'm saying. He knows every quote. He just knows the shit, and it's so awesome. Like I never have to feel alone with Rob around. So, but okay, all right. Well, that's a really great recommendation as far as that goes. Boy, and I was trying to think of something to recommend for people to check out. I'll go with a weird TV series as well. And no, you know what? Yeah, no. All right, I'm gonna go with the movie. Just to change it up. I was gonna say Probe for the TV show from '88 that Asimov had done, but no. Okay, so we're gonna do a movie. It's called Latitude Zero. All right. And this is one of those weird American / Toho films where they work together. Toho, of course, famous for doing the Godzilla movies and so much more. They are in many ways the Japanese Disney. And Latitude Zero came out in the 60s. You'll recognize some people from it that maybe you're used to seeing with white paint on their face, that being Cesar Romero, who played the Joker for many years in the Batman television series. This is a movie about basically a super sub before Sequest, not really before Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, but it is about a super sub and then also a utopian society that is kind of hidden at Latitude Zero. That's where the name of it comes from. I mean, it's cheesy 60s action. I think fairly high budget and high end for its time, certainly. But it's a movie that has a message of hope, which good luck getting there, or not a message. I don't want to say message of hope. Jesus fuck. It has a positive message for the future and for humanity, because basically this like utopia, when certain humans like get to a certain level, they're like, hey, why don't you come join us here at Latitude Zero? And I really like that. And they also, you know, a little bit of spoiler alert, but it's not the main thrust of the movie, but they also, you know, what technological developments they come up with, they leak out to the rest of the world to try and help the rest of the world. It's just a really, really great scenario laid out in a film. And I think overall the action and everything in it, and there's even some really, there's some quotes in it that I think you can take and go into life with, which we don't get a lot of that anymore either. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant little film. So Latitude Zero, a lot of fun. And that is something I know also you can find on the public library, as Rob would say, great copies of it too. So there you go. Latitude Zero and the Starlost, both very interesting picks to check out. Some enjoyable science fiction, unlike the rest of what we were talking about during this episode. So anyway, Rob, if that's it for you, that's it for me, man.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this baby up, and I hope everyone enjoys the new format, and everybody enjoys. I'm sure you're going to enjoy some of the conversations coming forward. I can't wait to review the Starlost, but of course we will talk about Star Wars and many other things, and we got to try and be happy about something, for fuck's sake. So when what's coming out today looks like shit, just look to the future and look behind you, and you'll find some kind of nugget of gold, I'm sure. So there we go. We will see all of you on the other side.